Hello. If you're watching this video, it probably means you're part of the Grace Media team, and this video is to sort of show you how to operate the new sound system that has been installed by AudioTrack. If you're used to doing media, some of this will look right. However, some of it will be much different, but we're going to go through all of it, so relax and sit back and enjoy. And if you're wondering about the media part, that'll be in a different video, and we'll go over that later. First of all, as you see, the entrance to the booth is here. There's several rows of wireless devices, the receivers for the wireless microphones, and sitting below that is a black rack mount type device. And you can see it a little bit better. As you see, it says Atlas Power on it. This box right here does several things, but the main thing that we need it for is to turn the power on. So this is how you turn everything on. You notice there's a piece of green tape that says power with an arrow, and there also says system activation. And what this does is, this is the sequencer. So it has everything related to audio connected to it. So with one button push, it will turn everything on in a very specific order as designed by AudioTrack. And whenever you turn it off, you'll again just have to push that one button, and it will sequentially turn everything off in a very specific order. So let's go ahead and turn it on, and I can describe what's going on. Pushing the button right here, you see the wireless devices turn on. There's several lights that have come on, and you now see that it is showing some numbers. That's basically our power ratings. There's no necessary need to pay any attention to that, other than that's what we need to do to turn the system on. Okay, so I've turned the power back off just so that I can go over a few things real quick. This is the new board. It's a Soundcraft digital console, which means that unlike our old PV setup that was analog, this does a lot more stuff like a computer would, as opposed to having individual knobs and dials and stuff on each channel and each fader. So what we're looking at now is when it's turned off. I will go ahead and turn it on, and you'll see sort of how things work with that. This does take a few minutes to boot up like a computer would, so don't be too shocked. It's not like an analog console like our old one where you flip the switch and it was automatically on. This one actually does have to do a few things. As you see, the screen has now come up here. Zoom in on it, and it's telling you that it's currently booting up. And whenever it's done, it will go to a menu screen. Okay, so as you see, the menu screen has come on. All of the faders go to the last setup that is used, and all of the lights have now come on for the items that are being used. As far as how this works, it's very similar to the old board, but there's also a few very different changes. As you see, there are multiple faders. As you see, there are also different sections of the board that look different. So let's start with, instead of the faders, which we'll get to in a minute, we're going to start with this corner up here. So on the old board, we used to have on every channel a gain, which you can see right here. This is where it's located on this board. This is a new function that we didn't have before, that's not really needed after setup. We also have other things that we can do that we are currently not using. Again, things that would be more for a setup as opposed to on a day-to-day basis. And then we would have our EQ and our monitors in the upper section before. Now in this section, it's all located here for the EQ. So this is your high, mid, low, and then you can change where some of these things go. Most of the time what you're going to be dealing with is still going to be in here, although in theory we should have to do that much less than on the old board. The monitor mixes are also in a different location, and that's something that we would use for 1030, and I'll get to later. Okay, so we discussed the EQs. The next thing down on our old board, of course, was the faders, or the sliders, whichever term you prefer. And we often had tape that marked which channel was which, as opposed to, you know, what we were doing. This digital board does it a little bit differently. So you'll see the number 1 up here is the first channel. Below it, every channel is going to have a title, which in this case it's Pastor J for Pastor Joanna. Next one over is Pastor D for Pastor Dalsing. There's the on button, which is again something that we had. It was labeled differently. It was labeled mute in the other one. And then we have a select button. The reason for that I'll go over in a second. And then of course we have the faders themselves. Now you'll notice that the one that says 7 and 8, so 7 and 8 says CPU L and CPU right. That is a stereo channel, and if you notice, it is lit up with a sort of yellowish, not yellowish, but like whitish, bluish kind of light. This fader is a stereo channel, meaning that we are sending a stereo signal from the computer so that the sound sounds a little bit better. It also works a little bit differently than every other slider. Every other slider we can just move up and down like you would normally do it on the old board. This one, you will notice, when we move it, it brings the other one along with it. All of the sliders on this board are mechanically moved. So what happens is, if it's a single channel, we just move it, like we can do here, and it doesn't do anything. But on stereo channels, it will move the other one with it. Now, you notice it delays a little bit. That's fine. It's electronically moving this channel when you move this channel, and vice versa. As you see here, it moves that one. Now, the mechanical slider doesn't always keep up as well, but electronically it's keeping up just fine, so you don't have to worry about that. The other thing it'll do is, as you see right now, it's turned off. If I go ahead and turn it on, it turns it on and it turns it off together. So you only have to hit one to turn it on. If you are wanting to move these, because they are mechanically moved, it's very difficult to move them together like this, because this one's going to try to move this one and this one's going to try to move this one, and if both your fingers are on it, it's not going to work very well and it's going to fight you. So it's best just to use the one and let it move itself on the other one. On our PV board, we had a certain number of faders that we could use, and that was all we had. On this board, because it's digital, we actually have more channels that we can use than we have sliders for. So with the digital board, we can do multiple things. First of all, we are not limited to just what we have, which in this case is 24 channels. We also have these set of buttons right over here. So what these buttons do is it takes this whole section and allows us to use the board in multiple ways. There's also another location where we can use the board in multiple ways, and that is the EQ, gate, and compressor section in the gains. So if you notice, I said selection button before, so here's where this comes in. Right now we have channel 1 selected, and you see a bunch of lights up here. So these are the settings for channel 1. If I change this to any other channel, I need to hit the right button, you notice the lights start changing. I've done nothing up here, but it automatically changes the settings to the channel that we're actually going to. So this is very important. If you need to change a setting on one of the faders, make sure that you have selected the proper one before you make changes, or else it will make changes to the one that's actually selected, and that could be detrimental. So that's something to watch out for. The other thing to watch out for, because just like how this uses this in multiple locations, you also have these buttons that I showed you over here. You have what's called layers. Let me move so you can see a little bit better. So right now we are on A layer. B layer, as you see, changed where all of the faders were. We also have a group of inputs up here, but these are obviously blacked out because they're not currently being used. For the praise band, we have a digital snake. It is very, if you know what a snake is, it's a extra set of inputs that we can put in a remote location and then run those cables back to the board. In this board, since everything's digital, we have a digital snake. So it is like the snake, whereas we have all of the inputs for the praise band up on their quote-unquote stage, but then we send a digital signal back here, and now we can use other channels that we wouldn't necessarily have been able to use previously. So if we use 24 on the first layer, now we have an extra 24. We also have a C layer. And remember me saying about the motorized faders? You see how they change every time I change a layer. So it's going to give you the settings for whatever the channel is on that layer. And don't worry if you need to change between A layer and B layer, because that's what most users are going to do. It's a silent system. The board does not create any sound whenever you change between layers. So even though you see the faders moving, it's still just moving those physical faders, not the signal that it is sending out to the system. So I've mentioned the C layer, and I've also mentioned the D layer. Now, in the setup, what we have done is we have set it up to do certain things, and as you see, some of the different colors are different. So this one's blue, this one's yellow, this is on D layer, this one is sort of a greenish yellow, we have blue here, and these are things that, again, in a normal service you're not going to have to deal with. It's things that were set up, but if we ever have issues where we have to go back in and change things, it helps us identify what it is we're actually looking for. The main things that you will have to deal with. On layer A, almost all of the services are going to use the first 8 inputs, and I'm going to focus in on them just so that we can see a little bit better. Okay, so it may be hard to read on your screen, but I've already mentioned Pastor J. I don't know if this helps or not, turning them off. But Pastor J, Pastor D, Pastor Joyner, Pastor Dalsing. Currently we're not using channel 3, which as you see the slider is turned completely down for that. The next one is the pulpit mic. We have the handheld blue, it's labeled H blue RF, so that's radio frequency or wireless. So it's a handheld blue wireless, the handheld red wireless, and the 2 channels for the computer. Almost every church service will use those. The next group, I'm going to move over just a little bit. Okay, so the next group starts at channel 9, and this is where most of the 9 o'clock. This is where the 9 o'clock service is going to basically begin. So you have the piano that's upstairs in the loft, the choir loft left and right, that's the overhead, the wired blue microphone, the wired red microphones, and this should all be something that is somewhat familiar to most people that you've used the board before. So that's set up the same way. Once you get to 14, you are now into the area of what 1030 uses for the praise band. So channels 13 through 23 are all of the band channels. So if you're not doing a 1030, you shouldn't have to touch them at all. This is where it may get a little confusing and you may have to go to a different layer from time to time. And this happens mostly whenever we have guest speakers or we're doing some sort of pageant or extra speakers, special event, something along that line. And what that is if we go to, we've now exhausted the first layer, if we go to the B layer, as you see, things have changed. So we now have 8 microphones here that are being used, and then afterwards these aren't. We may in the future, but these are the inputs that we use less frequently but still will need from time to time. So they are set up with stage right. We have channel 1 and 2. That is the old vocal front and piano front jacks on the, if you're looking at the stage, the left side near the piano that's on the floor. And then we also have stage left 1 and stage left 2, which are the 2 inputs that we kept from the inputs that are located, if you're looking at the stage, on the right, on the steps that the praise band used to use. We've only kept 2 of those due to some wiring issues. And then we also have RF lavalier A, B, and C. Again, RF for wireless. That is the old lavalier system that the pastors used to use. On very rare occasions, we do still use those, so we have them set up. And the last one is the ambient mic, which if you've ever done a recording or sat out in the narthex during a service, that microphone is what helps to pick up some of the extra sounds that may not be picked up by the inputs like the pastor's mics and stuff like that during church, so that when we do a recording you can hear that, or if you're in the narthex you can hear that also. So this one will be turned on, it will be used, but we should never have to adjust it. These ones, that 1 through 7 on this B layer, sometimes we may have to use them and sometimes not, but that is definitely something that is much less frequent, which is why it's on B. Okay, so I've now changed to layer C, and as you see we have a bunch of these yellowish greenish ones. These are specifically for the praise band, and what these are, this is the volume settings for the 5 monitor feeds that we have for the band monitors. We have the ability to add 5 more, which we currently are not using, but those are there. And then we also have some other effects and things that are further down on the board that we, again, don't need at the moment. So if you ever do sound for a service that includes the praise band and they say we need a specific monitor turned up, that it's just too quiet, this would be for the monitor itself, not an individual. You know, if they just say I want vocals or something like that turned up, that's different than this. This is the overall volume that the speaker is producing, not what's actually being fed to the speaker. And that is on the C layer. And on the D layer, again, something that you should not have to use on a very frequent layer, or something you should not have to use on a frequent occasion, but it may come up, is the sub for the subwoofer. Again, used mostly for the band. If you need the subwoofer turned up, we have a recording jack. If we ever do something where we want to record what it is we're doing, we have a dedicated feed to do that with, whether it's a CD or some sort of DAT tape or whatever it is that somebody comes in with. The camera feed, again, something that is set up and shouldn't have to be messed with, and the TVs in the narthex, which also again is set up and should not have to be used. Okay, so now that I've explained a little bit about where everything is, we're going to go into some functions now. First thing I'm going to do, if you do something with the praise band and you need to have something changed in their monitors, there's a row of buttons up here. As you see, I've already marked it with green tape. These are the monitor mixes themselves. So if you press this, you notice the faders change. And this is the same layer A that I had started off with before. So again, Pastor J, Pastor D, the pulpit, the handheld blue and red, computer, piano, choir, vocal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. If you ever have to do something where they say, especially as you see down here, on this mix, somebody says, you know, I can't hear the person on the third microphone, turn it up. That's where you would make the change here. Again, because this is yellow, you know that you're not making changes to the main sound. But if you need to change anything else outside of the monitor feed, you have to remember to come back and push the button to get back to what's actually going out in what they would call the house. So the main speaker system is still back on layer A, but you can come in and change what's on the different monitor mixes. So this again is different than if somebody says I need more volume totally, then that would be on layer C. If they need something specific changed, then that is on this labeled monitor mix up here. And again, you have to turn it off to get back. So let's say that you're actually going to do a service. And we're going to start with 7:30 just because A, they're the first in the day, and B, they tend to have what I would call the least moving parts. And it also applies to every service. Right now, we have the handheld red wireless turned on, which is going to be Gloria's microphone, at least for the near future. So that is something that she is going to control. Again, that is something you can leave on all the time. And the two pastors' mics, they've also requested that they stay on all the time. Most of the time when you're running sound, all changes can be done simply by moving the fader. Joe did a very good job. He's with Audio Track and he's their setup guy. Did a very good job of making it to where most of our issues that we can handle simply by doing this. On rare occasions, again, you may need to change a gain setting or an EQ setting, which is perfectly fine. So let's go over a little bit of how to do that. Since we are here, I'm going to use the handheld blue wireless, which currently is not turned on, so I'm going to turn it on, and it is currently not selected, so I'm going to select it. As you see, all of the changes, all of the settings up here have changed from the previous channel. I'm going to zoom in a little bit just to try to help everyone see a little bit of what's going on. And maybe you can read some of what's happening here. So, again, the gain is right here. You can turn this knob, and the thing that this board does, because it's digital, if I turn it, we have a screen. So as you see, it has popped up a little screen, and it is showing that I am in fact turning up the gain, and it's telling me exactly where it's at. Because it's digital, it's not like the old one where it has a set limit. You can turn this up and it will just keep turning up until it electronically stops it. The other thing, again, is the high pass filter. That's over here. This is something that is often done in audio circles and is, like I said before, was a setup thing. Vocals out of humans usually do not go below 100 hertz or so. So Joe has currently set this up for that because it is a vocal. It's not likely to be needing to be sensitive to things that maybe some instruments would make, so we can cut those out. And because it's a vocal microphone, that's why it was done that way. Next section is a gate. This is something that's very handy if you do start running into feedback issues, because there's a lot of noise. If that does happen, you feel free to turn it on, and as you see, this little red light has come on which says closed. As you have somebody talk into it, it will automatically open up the microphone stay active while they are talking. Once they stop talking, it turns itself off automatically. Again, this is something that can be used in feedback that's really bad, but is not something that you have to do if you can just use the gain to back it off a little bit, or come down to your volume and turn it down just a little bit. I'm going to turn the gate back off. The next thing is the compressor. This is something that is often used mostly in closed venues and recording, or live shows that have a lot of variation in sound, which isn't exactly what we do. So if you ever turn the compressor on, I'm going to be very shocked, because it's not likely to happen. The EQ is something that we will use frequently. Again, Joe went through and tried to set up every channel as best as he could with the EQ settings, which means that the only ones you're going to have to deal with are the first row, which is similar to the PV board that we had up in the old booth. It had a high, mid, and a low. So basically what this has done, it has split it into 4 instead of 3. But again, it still works the same way. High frequency pitches, which are determined by this row, so you can see approximately where they're at on each channel to know, if you want a little bit more bass and it's set, this frequency is fairly low, you want a lot of really heavy bass, you may need to use both of these as opposed to just the low. But again, if you have a little feedback, maybe knock the high off a little bit, and away you go. The only other thing that is in this section that we may have to worry about, and again, this is something that will happen if you're watching a video on the computer. Sometimes the video and the audio get out of sync, and in the old days all you could do was sit and watch it. With this board, we have a knob over here that says delay. And so what we can do is, if the video and the audio are out of sync a little bit, and the video is behind the audio, we can add some delay in and slow down how fast we're sending sound out, and you can actually adjust the audio to where it syncs back up without, in a way that you couldn't do before. Okay, so I've moved over to the main screen. And what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about some of the stuff on the screen. Most of this stuff, again, is stuff that during setup is needed. On a day-to-day basis, you're probably never going to use. But there are a few things that will help you out in case you do run into a problem. The first thing I would like to go over, as I zoom out, are two things. One is a button right here that says cue list. Okay, that cue list gives us on the main screen, move back over to it, on the main screen a few different things here. Number one says Grace template. That was the basic setup that when I talked to Joe and I said this is how we set our board up, was the basic setup. The Grace basic setup is actually once he tuned everything and got all our settings in. And as you see, I've already done one that says Grace 1030. This is the one that we're interested in. So if I go to it and I touch it, it automatically turns on what it was last left at for the 1030 service, which, as you hear, there's music playing coming off the computer, which I'm just going to turn off. So I am planning on setting up two more, one that has the basic setup for 7:30 and one that has the setup for 9 o'clock. So if you come in and something doesn't look right on the board, you can again come down to the button that says cue list, pull up the cues, select the service that you are going to be working, and it will automatically bring up the basic settings for that service. And that might also help out if something got bumped and you don't know where it went back to. At least that gives you the starting point again as to where the initial setup was, and you know how to do it. So in this case, let me zoom out a little bit. So I now have on the board the last setup, except for, like I said, we were playing a computer song the last time that we used 1030, but we have all of the faders have been moved mechanically to where they were. So as you see, the pastors are turned on, they're located here. Gloria's is on, the computer's here, they were on, but I turned them off. And then of course all of the band is over here turned on for the last time that they played with their settings. So it makes it very easy to just come in and get started. And then that way it takes a lot of the work. If somebody bumped something, changed something, and you don't like what it is, it's a little bit quicker for you to get up and running. I hope that this video is helpful to everybody. I hope it helps you to see things that we can and can't do anymore. But I hope that you also notice that even though the console looks very different than the old one, it does the same things, and it does so in some ways much easier because it's automatically set up, it's ready to go most of the time, and so therefore all you have to do is basically pay attention, use your ear, and change the faders more than some of the other fiddling that we used to have to do on the old board. So I hope that maybe alleviates some issues with some concerns, and just remember, with it being digital, any mistakes that we make, we can always go back to that previous cue template and undo it, and we're good to go. We don't have to worry about coming back in and making changes. So feel free to use those faders, make it sound how you like it to sound, and if you run into an issue where we do need to change some settings, feel free to play around a little bit. Just realize we may have to go back, but hopefully you'll find out that you don't need to, which is sort of the whole point with having Joe set it up the way he did. Again, feel free to watch this multiple times. I threw a lot of information at you. It's a very complex thing, but since most of you have run a soundboard before, hopefully you can see the connections and where it should make our jobs easier. So have a good day, and thank you.